Brant struggled with the controls as the UB-14 skimmed the cliff face. As soon as the plane cleared the top of the volcanic peak, Brant leveled off. The sudden jolt of the plane righting itself brought Kalinsky out of his stupor. "Everybody all right back there?" Brant asked. "Just peachy." "Where are we?" Andrej mumbled. "You took the words right out of my mouth," Brant hissed at his incapacitated co-pilot. Before Kalinsky could respond, the UB-14 was hit hard by a glancing blow to the passenger cabin. Kalinsky's head was knocked back into the leg of the table. He was out before he heard Will scream. "What the hell was that?" "That's easy. Something hit us," Brant said. "Another bird?" Will asked. "Don't think so. It was too big to be a bird." "Then what?" "I hate to say it, kid, but I haven't the foggiest idea what just happened." No sooner had Brant finished talking than a massive talon smashed through the plane's windshield and ripped off a large chunk of the cockpit. "Holy cow!" Will choked. "One thing I do know, kid, that was no cow." Brant looked out the gaping hole in the UB-14's upper fuselage and saw a massive white eagle diving directly at them. The giant bird still held the jagged shard of metal it had just ripped off their plane firmly in its talons. As the white bird neared the UB-14, it abruptly changed course while simultaneously letting go of the chunk of metal. The thin pane of aluminum spun towards the plane like a missile. It struck the UB-14's left engine, causing it to explode. The resulting blast threw the aircraft into a forced death spiral. The giant bird made one final pass at the iridescent plane as it dropped out of the sky, ripping another huge piece from the fuselage. "We're going down, kid! Strap yourself in as best you can!"
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Omni Viewer, and welcome to Kaiju Lit Circle, where today I've got something special in store. You see, this book is somewhat of a legend in the entertainment world, and to properly introduce it, we need to briefly step away from the world of literature and into the realm of cinema.
You are all familiar with Merian C. Cooper, I'm sure. A decorated war hero and maverick filmmaker, Cooper is the man who gave the world one of the most iconic monsters ever in the form of King Kong. The 1933 film is considered Cooper's magnum opus, his greatest masterpiece, and the biggest hit of that year.
However, serious film buffs will tell you that Cooper, being the brilliantly mad visionary that he was, had plans for a follow-up motion picture that would have made King Kong look trite by comparison.
That film was to be called War Eagles, the ultimate combination of wartime drama and Lost World fantasy. It was to be a cinematic adventure the likes of which no one had ever seen before.
Unfortunately, War Eagles was never made, though there was a good reason why.
Cooper conceived the story before America entered World War II, but during a long pre-production, the country's already shaky stance on neutrality was abandoned following the attack on Pearl Harbor. Cooper was a patriot before he was a filmmaker, so he signed up to fight for the Stars and Stripes pretty quickly, thus putting all of his cinematic projects on hold. After the war ended, War Eagles was no longer deemed relevant, and thus it was shelved forever. It became somewhat of a legend, like Jodorowsky's Dune, a potential masterpiece we would never get to see.
Or so we thought. As it turns out, War Eagles did eventually become available, just in a very different format.
A novelization of the concept, penned by Carl Macek, the man who wrote the dub scripts for the anime Robotech, was published in 2008. The hope was that the book would spark enough interest to justify making the movie in modern times.
Obviously that didn't work out either, which is a darn shame. Once you learn more about this story, you'll be as disappointed by the lack of a film as I am.
Lieutenant Jan Peter Brandt was once a decorated, respected military pilot, an unrivaled flying ace beloved by all who knew him. Unfortunately, his reputation is in shambles after an attempt to prove the superiority of an experimental plane almost kills the president. At his lowest point, Brandt gets an unexpected shot at redemption when the head of Imperial Avionics offers him a job. He wants Brandt to fly a different experimental plane, the UB-14, on a round-the-world flight, accompanied by the CEO's son Will and a suspicious co-pilot named Kalinsky. The catch is that Brandt will be flying longitudinally, a path that will take him over both the South and North Poles. After a smooth first leg of the journey, the plane is attacked by a flying white monster over the Arctic Circle. Brant survives the crash and finds himself in Arnland, a lush green island populated by dinosaurs and Vikings who ride on the backs of giant eagles called Orns. Brant is accepted into their culture, and his quest to find Kalinsky and JP, if they survived, will not only lead him to uncover a Nazi plot to destroy America, but also forge a bond between him and the same white eagle who stranded him there.
Having not read any original treatments of war eagles, if they even exist, I can't tell you how close the book sticks to Cooper's original vision. For all intents and purposes, though, it seems like the sort of thing he would have written, maybe with a slightly modern edge given years of hindsight. It's also a good read all on its own.
Structurally, War Eagles feels very similar to King Kong, in so much as there's a lengthy build-up to the arrival on the island, non-stop adventure once you're on the island, and an eventual return to New York City for the grand finale. Don't get to thinking this is just King Kong with big birds, though, because War Eagles has an identity all its own.
First and foremost, the settings are vastly different.
Skull Island is meant to be a treacherous, terrifying place where man is not welcome, whereas Arnland is a paradise right out of Edgar Rice Burroughs. It's a land that is primitive, but not uncivilized, as it is unhampered by the duplicity and artificiality of the modern world. Here, man is at one with nature. It's still a harsh kill-or-be-killed environment, but it is one where the odds are equal, and it's explored as thoroughly as can be in a novel of this length.
Of course, the nature of Arnland also serves as a clear subversion of Nazi ideals and belief systems.
Something often overlooked in the history of World War II is that Nazism wasn't just a political party, but also somewhat of a religious movement. The Nazis adopted various belief systems about the so-called true history of the world. We all know about their belief that blonde-haired, blue-eyed Aryans were the master race and Jews were subhuman vermin, but not as well known as the mythology behind that belief. According to what some might call the Nazi Bible, Aryans once lived in a frozen paradise somewhere in the Arctic, their culture heavily Viking-inspired, and it only gets stranger from there.
Now, if that description sounds an awful lot like Arnland, you'd be correct in drawing that comparison, because that was the point.
War Eagles very deliberately takes this core idea and turns it against the Nazis by saying, if your northern Vikings were real, they'd side with us instead of you. That's akin to a story where Jesus Christ returns to Earth and burns down Vatican City, or where L. Ron Hubbard comes back from whatever realm he transcended to just so he can kick Tom Cruise in the groin.
It really is a shame War Eagles was never released as a film back in the day, because all this stuff would have been a major talking point for modern film historians.
The use of eagles furthers this notion. Nazis used a lot of eagles in their symbolism, which must have upset quite a few Americans at the time. We have a fondness for eagles as well, you know. So having giant eagles be the heroic steeds ridden to battle the Nazis is simultaneously a subversion of Nazi symbolism and a reclamation of American symbolism.
Speaking of back in the day, it should be noted that the book, with the exception of a few subtle turns, really does feel like it was written back in the 1930s.
Carl Macek went to great lengths to ensure that War Eagles felt authentic, giving it the kind of gung-ho American patriotism and anti-Nazi sentimentality common from films and novels of the time.
Think of combining classic films like Lost Horizon to more recent fare like Raiders of the Lost Ark, and that'll give you a sense of how this book is written.
This tone is vital to understanding War Eagles. It's rooted in this old-fashioned sensibility without any hint of cynicism or irony. When it comes to patriotism and heroics, it is sincere in its mindset, and that sincerity should be able to win people over regardless of their outlooks on politics or the military.
However, I'm reviewing this as a giant monster book, and given the presence of dinosaurs and supersized eagles, it certainly would seem to qualify as one. So how does it fare in that regard?
Well, despite the era and creatures involved, War Eagles plays out more like fantasy than science fiction, with dinosaurs in place of dragons and Orns in place of equine steeds. The focus is placed squarely on the humans, but that doesn't mean the creatures are sidelined. Though the dinosaurs only appear a couple of times, they are showcased in some very impressive action sequences that would feel right at home in a Ray Harryhausen film.
The star of the show, however, is the wild white Orn on the book cover who becomes Brant's mount.
Brant names him Lindy, after famed pilot Charles Lindbergh. The twist with Lindy is that he's the one who downed Brant's plane, and he's regarded as the most powerful entity in Arnland. You could say he's the King Kong of this island.
Unlike Kong, however, Lindy is able to come to an understanding with the humans around him and eventually help win the day.
The scene in which Brant breaks him in as his steed is a highlight of the book, and I have no idea how they would have pulled it off with 1930s special effects, but I still would have loved to see it. After Lindy and Brant join forces, Lindy becomes a major player in the story, and his combination of intelligence and loyalty is sure to endear him to readers. Had he ever appeared in the movies, I'm certain he would have been a silver screen icon.
As I was nearing the end of War Eagles, I found myself experiencing a rare sensation. I didn't want to finish the book, because then it would be over. And I didn't want it to be over.
Everything about War Eagles made me want to stay in its world for as long as I could, and a part of me felt a bit wistful when I was finally done. To me, that's a sign of a truly great story. There are not many books I can point to which invoke this longing to step into its pages and experience the world directly.
That list includes Edgar Rice Burroughs' Barsoom series and James Gurney's Dinotopia series. Now, War Eagles stands alongside them.
I wouldn't be surprised if you, dear reader, also found yourself wishing you could live in Arnland and soar on the backs of Orns over prehistoric landscapes. There's no shame in admitting it.
My hope is that one day War Eagles will be realized in the format for which it was originally intended. But until that day comes, we have the book, and I highly recommend it. Whether you enjoy giant monsters, fantasy, wartime dramas, pulp fiction, or just good stories, this is one you've got to track down, no question. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer, signing off. Maybe they could do this as an animated movie. Kinda like How to Train Your Dragon, but with Nazis. Who am I kidding? That would never sell.
If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like it, as well as subscribe to the channel for more content of a similar nature. Also, check the description for links to our Twitter, DeviantArt, and Patreon pages, as well as the Amazon link for the novel Operation Red Dragon: The Kaiju Wars Part 1, penned by yours truly. Thank you all, and we appreciate your support.